All right, so we are in Daniel chapter. Anybody got the chapter?
Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
I don't remember exactly which verse, but it's chapter 2.
Okay, so chapter 2, we talked a little bit about Nebuchadnezzar's dream. And what was the dream? Yeah, there was a statue. And what was the dream about? What did he actually dream?
Different kingdoms, rulers that were going to be in charge.
Right, the head was made of
Gold,
and the shoulders silver, and the abdomen and thighs bronze. Right, the thighs are iron, and then the feet are
clay.
a mixture of iron and clay. And then what happens? A big crash, because a boulder not cut from the mountain by hand rolls down and topples the statue. And then what happens to the rock, the stone?
It became a huge mountain, filled the whole earth.
Yes, it became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. We see here that each one of these, in this dream, each thing stands for something else, right? It's not just that he is dreaming about actual gold. Who is the head of gold?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Nebuchadnezzar is the head of gold, and he is the only one out of the other kingdoms that is actually mentioned, okay? The rest, we can kind of pull from this, that the silver shoulders are the the Mede-Persian Empire, which we'll see with Darius and Cyrus. And then from there, you have the Greek Empire, the bronze abdomen, right? And this was started by Alexander the Great when he conquered most of Europe, right, and made it all the way to India. And then finally, you have the Roman Empire, which is the iron and the clay. And who is the rock? Jesus, right? Because he is not made by hand, right? He is the one who was not born by the will of man, right? But that he was conceived by the Holy Spirit in the womb of a virgin. And we see this in other Psalms, right? Jesus is the blank that the builders rejected.
Cornerstone.
Yeah, the stone that the builders rejected has become the capstone, right? And so Jesus is often talked about as a stone, especially in some of the Psalms, but also in the New Testament. With this building imagery, okay? Now, why does the stone become a great mountain and fill the world?
Because the church spreads to the whole world?
Right, that the church is Christ's body, and the mountain, as we heard today, we see that mountains are very important, right, in the Old Testament. Where in Isaiah 25, which is often read for funerals, that it says that on this mountain the Lord will hold a great feast. And in this great feast he will take away the veil of death, right, and the shame that covers all nations. That the idea of a mountain is very, very important because what happens on a mountain? In the Old Testament. Just think of some things that have to do with mountains.
10 Commandments.
Yeah, 10 Commandments. Mount Sinai, right? What else?
Sermon on the Mount.
Right, from the New Testament, right. Jesus sits down on a mountain. What else?
There's mentioned the ark.
Right? The ark rested on Mount Ararat. What else?
Jerusalem's built on a hill.
Yeah, Jerusalem's built on a hill. The temple is built on a particular hill, Mount Moriah, which is,
Isn't that where Abraham
Yes.
sacrificed Isaac?
where Abraham was going to sacrifice Isaac, right? So the mountain theme is very, very, very important. In fact, there was a lot of traditions that Eden was on a mountain. And in fact, you find this in Dante's Divine Comedy, where paradise is actually at the top of the mountain of Purgatory, which is actually on the other side of the world from Jerusalem, right? Which shows that they believe the world was round, right? So all these flat earthers, see, nobody has believed that the world was flat since like Strabo's time, okay, the 1st century AD, okay? Every educated person in the Middle Ages believed that the world was round. Now, they believed that it was geocentric instead of heliocentric, but, and it's the same way too. Columbus believed that the world was round. What was he looking for?
Asia.
Yeah, he was looking for Asia to trade, right? And that's a quest that kept going up until all the way through the 19th century. Right? Why did they try to have all these expeditions to the Arctic? They were trying to find a passageway through.
Faster route.
Because, it's really inconvenient to have a big, two continents kind of sitting in the way. Right? Which is why, what did they do in the early 20th century?
Panama Canal.
Panama Canal, right? So that way you didn't have to go all the way around, right? And in fact, it's interesting because some early maps of the United States, before Lewis and Clark, there were huge, they would actually write in big bodies of water, even though they never existed. And the reason why they did that, I think, was because they were hoping that there were, so that way they could get through. But just shows that hope springs eternal. And then they found out, oh, well, I guess this is all land, But, yeah, so nobody believed that the world was flat, except for maybe very, very, very uneducated people, which was the majority of people at the time, I guess. So, but, which is why flat earthers, I don't know if you guys, have you ever heard of flat earthers?
Yes.
Yeah. You should go watch their stuff. It'll both aggravate and amuse you. So the four kingdom scheme here is the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar. The silver shoulders are the Persia-Median Empire, then the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. Now, there are some who say that the four are the Babylonian, then the second is the silver is the Mede Empire, the bronze is the Persian Empire, the iron and clay is the Greek Empire, and then the mountain is God's kingdom. Well, what's the problem with that scheme?
What about the Romans?
Right, Jesus didn't come during the time of the Greek Empire, right? And that's because these people who put forward this scheme don't believe that Daniel is foretelling the future, right? That he believes that people who hold to that view believe that Daniel wasn't really Daniel, but that he was some dude writing during the time of Epiphanes Antiochus IV, right? In the second and first century BC, and that what he's doing is foretelling the coming of God's kingdom when they're fighting the Seleucids, which is what the Maccabees do, right? I don't know if you guys ever heard of the Maccabees. Yeah, so that's why we don't hold to the Greek view, because it doesn't take seriously that Daniel here is actually foretelling the future. Now, it's interesting because this will come up again in chapter 7. Okay? usually these visions are kind of double, right? Only in chapter 7, the head of gold is the lion. Silver is the bear. Bronze is the leopard. And the iron and clay is the beast. And then for the mountain, you have the coming of the Son of Man. So here we see a repetition of this same fourfold scheme in chapter 7, only it uses different imagery to say the same thing. We'll find the same thing happening in the book of Revelation when we get there. So, Daniel interprets his dream, tells him what it's about, and then what does Nebuchadnezzar do?
Worships Daniel.
He honors him, right? And makes him high in the kingdom. Okay? So, that is the end of chapter 2. Is there any questions on that so far? All right, so chapter 3. Now, chapter 3 is very, very important because there's a historical setting that goes with this, okay? Now, unfortunately, Daniel chapter 3 contains no chronological notice for the setting of the events that it relates, okay? There's no chronological marker, like a year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign or whatever. So, but we need to put it in perspective in order to understand why Nebuchadnezzar is going to do in chapter 3 what he does. Okay? So, why would he dedicate a great golden statue? Well, there was a rebellion that took place in Babylon around December 15th to January 12th, 594. Okay? In the 10th year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign. So Nebuchadnezzar suppressed the rebellion, and he purged his army of all those who were traitors. And at the end of that year, Nebuchadnezzar made a trip to his western provinces to collect tribute. Okay? And then Zedekiah, who is the last king of Judah, actually makes a trip to Babylon, and basically professes his loyalty. Okay? Now, unfortunately, it appears to have the opposite effect because in 593, Zedekiah then rebels against Nebuchadnezzar, and the temple is destroyed, and Zedekiah has his sons killed before him, and his eyes are gouged out, and that sort of thing. So why would Nebuchadnezzar put forward a great golden statue? Well, it was not only a religious symbol, but it was also a political profession, right? When you bowed to this golden statue that Nebuchadnezzar put up, you were not only worshiping his gods, but you were also giving loyalty to him. It's like saying the Pledge of Allegiance, right? Or taking an oath. That is what this is, okay? So that kind of puts it in perspective here, and why Nebuchadnezzar gets as angry as he does when the three young men don't worship. Because what are they doing by not worshiping? Not honoring his gods.
Defying the political order.
They are defying the political order. They look like traitors. Right? They look unpatriotic. They look like traitors. The same thing would happen many, many years later to the early Christians. What were some of the accusations against the early Christians?
They weren't loyal to Caesar.
Right. They were atheists because they didn't worship the Roman gods. They were misanthropes, which means they hated humanity because they wouldn't participate in the pagan festivals. And they were, political deviants, rebels, traitors, because they wouldn't burn incense to Caesar. Okay? In the ancient world, religion and politics always went together. Always. And if you didn't worship the god of that city, you, right? And this is what's going to happen to the three young men, right? Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, but as you know them, yes. It's interesting we know them by their Babylonian names, but not by their actual Hebrew names. But all right, so let's read chapter 3, verses 1 through 7.
King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will be immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up.
So here you see too, why is Nebuchadnezzar doing this? This is an opportunity for his officials who rule in the other provinces to profess their loyalty, which makes sense because what just happened? There was a rebellion, right? And that's why it's important to look at the historical record, because these things don't just happen in a vacuum, right? Same thing happened with McCarthyism, right? I mean, you can only understand McCarthyism and the Red Scare by actually looking at what was going on politically at that time. And that there were spies. There were Russian spies, like, what were they? The Rosenbergs, right? I mean, that's the thing, is that you can only understand the Red Scare if you look at the political context behind it and the historical context. In the same way, Daniel 3 doesn't make much sense unless you know what's going on in Nebuchadnezzar's reign and why the punishment is so fearful, right? Why would the punishment be so fearful? Well, if you defy the king, you're going to die, right? He's not going to put up with he's not going to be lenient. He's not going to put up with it, right? So, the cubit, the thing is 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide. Now, there are different cubits in the Bible. The cubit was normally the length of one's forearm, including the hand and the fingers. A cubit usually for the Israelites would have been about 17.5 inches. Okay? So that would make the statue 87.5 feet tall or 8.75 feet wide. But in the Near East, they often adopted longer cubits to make things bigger. And so if it was the longer cubit, the statue would have been 101.5 feet tall and about 10 feet wide. Right? So this is a pretty big statue. Okay?
That was all gold?
Yeah, well, that's a good question if it was all gold or if it was just gold-plated. More than likely, it was probably gold-plated. And how, it says that this took place in the plain of Dura. However, that's kind of debated because the word Dura is an Akkadian word which means wall or enclosure. So if that's the case, then Nebuchadnezzar set up his statue in the cleft or a niche in the city wall, which would explain the next phrase, in the province of Babylon, outside the city proper. And that would make sense because a statue that's 90 feet high, but only about 9 feet wide, would need support, right? Because that's too tall and not wide enough of a base. So more than likely, this was built into the city wall, so that way they could, because why build something so tall but not wide enough? Right? Why do it? Well, to emphasize the king's greatness and et cetera, okay? So, the city wall of Babylon is about 295 feet high and about 79 feet thick. Okay, so even if the statue was 101 feet high, the city wall would still be more than half of what that was. I mean, if you see the gates of Ishtar in Germany, in Berlin, it's gorgeous. And that's just the ornamental first gate. I mean, it's huge. Okay? So these walls are thick, which they would need to be, right? Because what do walls do? Protect you, right? And you want them thick so that way if there's a siege that comes, you can defend yourself, right? So they also have the satraps. They are administrators over large territories. Prefects and governors are, prefects, those two words could actually be those prefects who were governors, okay? So basically what it is all of the administrative and all of the officials of the provinces, which is very important because who's missing here? Daniel, right? So, why do you think Daniel is missing?
He was serving in the king's court. He wasn't out in the provinces.
You're right. This is just for the king's provinces, right? It'd be like having the White House, having all the governors come in and profess their loyalty, right? When it's not including his own cabinet, right? That's what it would be like. So he's bringing in the people from all the provinces to give their loyalty, right? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are in the provinces. They are not in the king's court, right? Which is why they're put in a very awkward position, right? So, there are a few other things here. Some interesting translations of harp and drum and the like. But, we don't have to go through all of these things, right? Because what it's supposed to be is very impressive. When they hear this music, what are they to do? They are to fall down and worship this statue, okay? So, that is what they are supposed to do. Now, let's continue reading verse 8 through 18. Three, 8 through 18.
Therefore at the time certain Chaldeans came forward and maliciously accused the Jews. They declared to King Nebuchadnezzar, O king, live forever. You, O king, have made a decree that every man who hears the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music shall fall down and worship the golden image. And whoever does not fall down and worship shall be cast into a burning fiery furnace. There are certain Jews whom you have appointed over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. These men, O king, pay no attention to you. They do not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Then Nebuchadnezzar, in furious rage, commanded that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought. So they brought these men before the king. Nebuchadnezzar answered and said to them, Is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? Now, if you are ready, when you hear the sound of the horn, pipe, lyre, trigon, harp, bagpipe, and every kind of music, to fall down and worship the image that I have made, well and good. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up.
All right, so what happens here? What do the Chaldeans do?
They tattle on Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Right, they slander them, they maliciously accuse them. The Hebrew here is interesting. Literally, it means they ate their pieces. Okay? The idiom "eat the pieces of" is a figure of speech for malicious accusation or slander. Okay? And so that is what they are doing. They're angry, right? Because these Judeans, these exiles, these slaves are above those who are native Babylonians. And they make 3 accusations here. They say they do not heed the king's royal authority, they do not serve the king's gods, and they do not bow down to the golden statue. So the first charge focuses on the civil authority of the king, and the second and third charges focus on his religious authority. So what are they doing? First, they're calling them traitors, right? They're not obeying the king, but more importantly, they do not worship the king's gods. Because what does Nebuchadnezzar believe about his gods?
They're the ones that put him in office.
Right. He is their representative, and the gods have given him, his gods have given him victory over all of these lesser gods. It's kind of like, my dad can beat up your dad. Well, my God can beat up your God. That's how it was in the ancient world. So that is what it is. And the relationship of the king to the gods was very important. In Egypt, the king was actually called Horus, and it was his duty to keep the universe in order. In Babylonian and Assyrian context, the king is the intermediary between the gods and the kingdom. He is not only a ruler, but he is also a priest. And when you screw up that balance, what happens?
Gods get mad.
The gods get mad and your kingdom falls, right? So, Nebuchadnezzar is mad, right? He's in a furious rage, not only because of what they're doing, but also because, in the back of his mind is also the rebellion, okay? And he says that, it's interesting here because then he says, then what God will save you from my hands? Does Nebuchadnezzar mean that no God can save from his hands? No. But these lesser gods can't save you. This puny God of, Israel can't save you because I conquered him, right? I put his people under tribute. Obviously, he's weaker than my God. And so, if the stronger gods are on my side, then you guys are, you're up the creek without a paddle, right? But how do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answer him?
their God, that they don't need to answer to Nebuchadnezzar, that their God will save them. His God will, their God.
Can save them. They don't say he will. They said he can save us, but whether or not he does, they won't bow down to the statue.
Right. That's the thing. He says, our God is able to save us from the fiery furnace. But if he doesn't save us, we're still not going to do it. Right? What do Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego do? Their trust is in God who can save them. Will this God save them?
They don't know.
They don't know, right? There's no promise, right? But nevertheless, even if they have to die, they are still not going to break the first commandment. That's what Daniel chapter 3 is all about. This is all about the first commandment. Do we cling to the true God, or do we fall away? And this is where the rubber really hits the road, right? They're being threatened with death, a very horrifying death of burning. And we've talked a little bit about burning in the Old Testament. People were buried. Burning was a despicable, it was a punishment. It just didn't happen. And if it did happen, it was judgment. So when Josiah actually burns the bodies of the false priests, that was judgment against them because they worshipped a false god. And that's why again and again it says, like, he was buried in the tombs of the kings, or he was buried in Jerusalem, but not in the tomb of his fathers, right? Being buried in the family tomb was a very, very important thing, a very honorable thing for the Israelites. To not be buried was a punishment. This is why God, through Jeremiah, tells Coniah, I will give you a donkey's burial, which means no burial. We'll leave, your body will be left out for the buzzards, right? So, and so here they are being threatened not only with death, but also with not being buried. And yet, at the same time, they cling to the true God, to the Savior, who can save them, but if he doesn't save them, that's his business, right? And that's what the first commandment is all about, right? We don't simply say, oh, well, God, this is tit for tat. You save me, I'll serve you. But if you don't help me, then I'm not going to serve you, right? That's not actually obeying the first commandment. We don't barter with God, right? Because we have nothing to barter with. Everything that we have is from him, right? And sometimes that means suffering, persecution, pain, and death, right? That's what it means to love God above all things. And we see this most clearly in whose case? Jesus, right? He loved his Father so much that what did he suffer? The crucifixion. And not just the physical agony of the crucifixion, but also during that 3 hours, all of the pain and suffering of hell for all sinners at all times. Right? And he did that because he loved his Father, not because he was going to get anything in return for it. Right? So we see the first commandment embodied in Jesus most clearly, but we also see it here, where these guys are willing to suffer death rather than to fall away from Jesus, to fall away from the true God, the God of Israel. So, and that's something that we should be aware of, because what is happening in the world?
Christians are being persecuted all over the world today.
Yeah, it is a very, very scary place. Like, for example, what was there, 400 new martyrs in Nigeria? People suffer for the faith all the time. In India, as I have posted on our Facebook page, the government there is becoming more and more anti-Christian all the time in its legislation. Macau, China, they've actually kicked our missionaries out there a couple different times. So, yeah, I mean, the world is, the world's the world. It's always been the world, right? And it hates us because it hates, right? Because it hates God, because it hates Jesus, right? So, these are things that we should be prepared for. And it shouldn't just be like when we're...
Canada, didn't they just vote that if schools will not accept the liberal agenda, so to speak, they lose their accreditation?
Right, that was...
That means all Christian schools and colleges are going to be unaccredited in Canada.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, in Canada, preaching that homosexuality is a sin is a hate crime. And now, because it was their Supreme Court that decided on this case, and it was a Christian, university that its code of conduct had in there not only that about not being in a same-sex union, but also in just being chaste, that you will not engage in any premarital sex. And yet they were unaccredited. Their legal department was actually unaccredited for that, right? And I mean, that's not that far away in the United States too. I mean, so these are why we should be ready for persecution and prepare for it, because the world that your children and your grandchildren are going to live in is going to be much, much harder. And it's going to be very, very easy to bow down to that golden statue. Right? Well, I don't believe it. Doesn't mean anything if I, bend the knee. Right? Well, actually it does. Because what does Jesus say? If you deny me before men, I will deny you before my Father in heaven. Right? Now we actually have to take these words of Jesus seriously. And even your own confirmation vows. What did you vow in confirmation?
To face anything, even death, in order to...
Right. To suffer all, even death, rather than fall away from this faith. Right? So that's why it's... if you're going to make a vow like that, you should at least consider, at least think about it a little bit, right? So, that is, Any questions on any of that?
A lot of the liberals now think it's a hate crime if you don't believe in the gay marriage. It's here in the United States.
Mm-hmm. Although it's interesting because it's funny to watch the left eat itself. I just heard that, what's her name? Scarlett Johansson. She was going to play some transgender whatever, and now she's pulled out because of LGBT influence, right? So the homosexuals are actually against these transgender. It's kind of hilarious actually to watch them just destroy themselves, right? And it kind of reminds you of Jesus' words that a kingdom divided cannot stand. And in these latter days, that shows like how destructive Satan's kingdom is, because it is divided, right? And it is fighting, and they destroy themselves. But I mean, this is the thing. Even in our own area, this is a big danger, right? Iowa was the first one to legislate from the bench regarding gay marriage. So this is the thing. We live in a state that